I'm Tim Ventura, and we're joined today by Nick Eftiamideas, an American government official, author, and educator, best known for his work Chinese intelligence operations. Nick's 34-year government career includes employment in the CIA as a technical operations officer, special agent in the U.S. Department of State, Bureau of Diplomatic Security, and as a senior intelligence officer in the Defense Intelligence Agency. Nick was also a senior research fellow at King's College War Studies Department in London. He has an MS in Strategic Intelligence, National Defense Intelligence College, and a BA in East Asian Studies from George Washington University. He currently works as an assistant teaching professor in the Penn State Homeland Security program. So I want to do my disclaimer here first. The views and opinions expressed in this interview are of Nick Eftiamideas alone and do not represent the views of the U.S. government, its representative agencies, or Penn State. Also, none of the views or opinions that we'll be discussing should be taken as insulting or disparaging to Chinese culture, society, or individual people in any way. Our focus is entirely on well-known and established geopolitical rivalries in the Asia-Pacific region. So, Nick, welcome, sir. It has been quite a while. Thank you for joining me, and thank you for your tremendous career of service to our country.
Oh, thank you, Tim. I appreciate that. And thank you for having me back. It's always a wonderful experience being here.
Oh, absolutely. Well, so today we're talking about TikTok, currently one of the largest social media networks on the internet with over 1 billion users worldwide and 86.9 million users here in the United States. And its parent company, ByteDance, is currently under investigation by the U.S. Justice Department for quote-unquote possible spying on U.S. citizens. So what's your opinion on the situation as it currently stands?
Well, the problem is that the U.S. is facing a different type of, let's call it, aggressor. Okay, China, typically in Western societies, you've had disagreements with countries. Intelligence and spying has most often been relegated to the world of espionage and intelligence agencies, and conflict has always been violent. But it's not so with China. I mean, China has a hybrid warfare concept. They have an unrestricted warfare concept in which every part of society is galvanized to act against its perceived enemies. And that includes the economy, that includes personal relationships, that includes academia, that includes commercial relationships and business. So the problem is that the U.S. is threatened by this when faced with it, and it doesn't really, A, know how to respond, and B, nor does it have the legislation in place to respond. We have a changing world. We have artificial intelligence and changing dynamics, the importance of cyber, the importance of data, and the ability to pull together data from disparate sources and to affect a country's economy and livelihoods, and in a way never before. China's taking advantage of this, and the U.S. doesn't know how to contend with it. And TikTok is just an example of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in terms of concern, on December 30, 2022, President Joe Biden signed the No TikTok on Government Devices Act, which prohibited the use of the app on devices owned by the federal government, with a few exceptions. So in April of 2023, at least 34 states have announced or enacted similar bans on state government devices for agencies, employees, and contractors, right? So the idea is to keep TikTok off of government-issued devices to prevent, again, this quote-unquote possible spying. So at the very least, I guess, what this says to me is that these concerns are being taken very seriously enough to be codified into law, right?
Right. I mean, even if you're not a member of TikTok, okay, you're not a signed in member of TikTok. I mean, going on their site and looking at things, they know what you're looking at, they know your IP address, they know your location and your operating system. Those 4 elements that TikTok knows. So the question, and because Chinese law, China has many laws, the counter-espionage law of 2014, updated in 2013, the espionage law of the intelligence law of 2017, all these require individual companies, what one might call private, even though they're not really so private in China. Individuals, academia, companies, state-owned enterprises, etc., to report information to the Chinese government upon being requested. So no matter what any company says, we will never turn over. No, they will turn over, period, because the Chinese government's made that very clear. We've seen Jack Ma, it's one of its highest profile billionaires in the world, detained for months in silence for not passing over information on users from Alibaba. So, which isn't generally known, but that's why he was detained. So, it's a threat environment unlike any that we've faced. The government, state and federal, are doing what they can. Right? No, we don't want TikTok on you and then being able to tell where you are, what facilities you go into, where you are on a daily basis. Got it. But that's just the smallest part of the problem.
Well, so the reason that I'm so excited to have you with me today to talk about this was I stumbled across a really interesting plot twist to this story. In September, the Wall Street Journal published, quote unquote, "The Billionaire Keeping TikTok on Phones in the US." That's the name of the story, which claims that TikTok managed to avoid losing a Senate vote that would have banned it outright in the United States due to influence from an American investment group with a 15% stake in the company that's currently valued around $21 billion. So to me, this seems like it highlights one of the major problems with identifying and stopping Chinese espionage, which comes from the fact that our economies are so closely coupled after 2 decades of exporting American manufacturing. I mean, our economies have come together and there are so many intermingled relationships, I guess. Does that complicate things further?
Sure. Well, there are two aspects to the situation you just mentioned. Aspect number one is that the economies are closely intertangled. I can tell you, I remember being up in Congress 30 years ago and sitting in congressmen's offices when American businessmen would come in and talk about how they're being pressured by the Chinese government to request 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that type of thing from the U.S. And those were the cases that they were actually open and honest about it. So there's a lot of China uses that economic relationship to pressure the United States through businesses into trade concessions, political concessions, etc. Sometimes it's implied, and sometimes it's very, very direct. Do this or else. So sort of depends. The other component of this, though, is that as you'll find members of Congress responding back to you and saying, "Look, I don't know who comes through my door at any given point in time. I have constituents, I have companies, I have factories, and I cannot ask. I don't, and I can't ask, are you associated and tied to the Chinese government? Is the Chinese government making you do this?" So it's problematic from everything from a legal standpoint, which is what I said earlier, to an operations standpoint, to how China operates and leverages these types of contacts. And that's the key thing. And we've seen the same thing with Vanguard and what's the other investment firm? Black, I'll remember it. Investment firms that turn around with multi-billion-dollar investments in China, but are pushing back on U.S. policy on behalf of their investors, on behalf of their money. So it becomes a contentious fight between systems.
Yeah. Very convoluted situation. Although, again, going back to the Bloomberg story, what they had written was because TikTok is owned by a Chinese company, ByteDance, and because China requires its companies upon request to share any national security related data with the government, TikTok's popularity among Americans carries implications beyond the mobile screen. This goes back to what you were just saying about China's national security law, right? And if I remember correctly, not only are they required to turn over information, but if the Chinese government says you can't openly talk about this, they're not allowed to openly speak, right?
Oh yeah, China makes that very, very clear as well. They have to, and the problem is always that national security information is defined as anything that the Chinese government says it is. So people taking pictures on street corners have been arrested for national security, violations. Why? It's a street corner, it's out in the open. But China has done this, for many, many decades, actually. But now they're codifying it in law, so they have a little something to rest upon. They're using it as justification. So it's the fact that they have it in law, the fact that people are obligated to be silent about it, to restrict information, and let's not lose sight of the fact that people are rewarded for doing this. Companies are rewarded, individuals are rewarded. They're awarded through the social credit system. And the social credit system even talks about reporting on people and how that gets you X number of points, advances you X number of points in the social credit system. So it actually is very laid out in China's administrative policies and running the country. So, it's encouraged to do this sort of thing. It's demanded that silence is the responsible thing, that everyone has to have silence upon doing it. And it's mandatory should the government ask. So, given those three elements, you can understand foreign countries' sort of concerns with any data that go over to them. I mean, and I've heard the comparisons between Facebook and Instagram and things like that. It's a lot different. It's a lot different. You have a U.S. company subject to U.S. law or even European guidelines and European law on the restriction of taking information, the use of information, and what they're allowed to do with it. They're not giving it to a foreign government for targeting purposes. So those are the big differences.
Well, and actually that goes to one of the upcoming questions. Although I do want to flip the story around for a moment. Yale Law School research scholar Yang Cheng recently published an article in Wired magazine entitled "The All-American Myth of the TikTok Spy." And in that article, I believe what Yang was saying was that TikTok concerns are partially motivated by data-hungry American corporations worried about losing users' data and ad revenue. So in other words, what the author was saying was that this is the pot calling the kettle black, with the U.S. accusing China of behavior that we'd let our own companies get away with, except that instead of national security reasons, it would just be ad revenue and user data. Right?
Yeah, and that's the biggest difference in the world. It's if you're collecting data on individuals for maximum efficiency in attacking a nation, that's a heck of a lot different if you're collecting information to decide what type of garden hose to sell them. So it's yes, I agree with him 100%, but that's the key difference. One of them is using to actually threaten physically and otherwise threaten the United States, and the other one is using it to sell products entirely, to better refine the products that are the product selections that are sold. Big difference.
Yeah. Well, TikTok is highly visible, right? But it is on a list, this federal ban put it on a list with at least 59 other Chinese companies that are banned from receiving U.S. investment due to suspected ties to defense or surveillance technology sectors. That's something that Reuters had published about. Now, I'm going to put links to all these stories in the show notes.
Right.
But so this takes the TikTok controversy back to your primary area of concern, which is espionage and surveillance by the Chinese government across a diverse number of business, government, and educational sectors, right? So this isn't just TikTok. This isn't one particular company or organization. This is something that is a much larger concern, I guess.
Tim, we have a saying that China employs a whole of society approach to espionage. And that means through the legal system enforced or pushed by the CCP, created by the CCP, they necessitate compliance from state-owned enterprises, from private companies, from individuals, in addition to those traditional agencies and ministries that were normally supporting China's defense interests. So you actually get a massive effort on the part of China, driven by law that says you must obey the CCP. So of course and China kept this hidden for quite some time, for many decades, quite some time. And the reality is American businesses were making a fortune, so they were all too willing to look the other way and progress and push their manufacturing and their interests into China. The theory being it's 1.4 billion people. We sell everyone a cigarette, we're rich. So, American business and our politicians were far too willing to go do that, whatever the cost. And now it's coming back to hurt us.
Well, it is in so many ways. And one of the things I wanted to go back to was, again, the disclaimer here being that our concern is with the Chinese Communist Party and their government policies, not with the Chinese people. And when I thought about that, I thought, what is the best example of that? The Chinese people are often the victims of coercion and intimidation
Right.
themselves, with overseas relatives being threatened unless they participate in these activities. And I think one of the best recent examples was the story about secret police stations where those are being used. The claim is they're being used to basically threaten Chinese citizens who are like right here in America as well as around the world, right?
Right. This is, and the unfortunate part is it's nothing new. This came out in with gosh, I forgot the name of the think tank that came out with the report and said there were about 110 of them. But I can remember this going back to the 1980s. I mean, now because it's on the scale, because it's been brought publicly, the FBI is dealing with it in the United States. But it's been happening since the 1980s. And in fact, back in those days, in any Chinatown in the U.S., you would see a battle between tongues between business associations, between those controlled primarily by Taiwan influence and those upcoming ones controlled by influence from mainland organizations. So, the influence of the Chinese diaspora, the threats, the coercion, has been going on for decades. What's new is that you do have a lot of people who have fled China, more and more, who are fleeing China with lots of money, and China's out hunting them down.
Yeah.
This is Operation Fox Hunt. And so they have leveraged that presence that they traditionally had for political purposes, influencing the Chinese diaspora and some reporting activities as well. But now they've leveraged that into becoming hunters, into going after those people who have fled China, and for either political reasons or for actual what China would call criminal organizations, for real life money laundering and things like that, corruption.
Yeah, it's the evolution of this is just intriguing, and again, none of this is hearsay. I'm basing the Chinese secret police station in New York City. Two individuals have been arrested inside New York, and
Right.
if I understand correctly, authorities have filed charges against 34 officers with China's National Police Force back in China. So these reports are substantiated, and these are currently being litigated, right?
Yeah, this is the Changla Association in New York City. And there are a number of other cases in New York about China using local residents, not even China's Ministry of Public Security. There are cases ongoing against them, but there are ongoing cases against even just court system out of Fujian province. Just court officers, not actually even China's Ministry of Public Security, but doing the same thing, going to the United States and threatening or getting locals in the United States to threaten individuals to try and collect money out of them. So it's and it's worldwide, which is the intriguing part of this. It's not just the U.S. So when you consider the volume of China's efforts globally, it's actually pretty extraordinary to be expanding into doing this activity in literally over 100 different places worldwide. It's pretty all-encompassing. It's part of this unrestricted warfare approach that China uses, which is really a all-encompassing national effort.
Well, one of your areas of expertise is maintaining a database with hundreds of cases of Chinese espionage that are taking place across the United States. I think last time we talked, you were nearing 12, or was it 800 documented cases? Right. And it's possible, from what you said in the past, that there are thousands more that authorities simply aren't aware of, right?
I would, people ask me all the time, how much of this is how much of it is everything, Nick? And I say, I don't know. The FBI doesn't know. The CIA doesn't know. China doesn't know. Okay, because the scale is so vast, nobody knows. What we do know is that I have 772 cases, and out of those cases, which deal with covert action or covert influence, traditional espionage, economic espionage, and illegal exports. You can see, and you can do extraordinary analysis and see patterns of behavior, recruitment patterns, how people are recruited to conduct espionage, what the tradecraft is like, what they call espionage tradecraft is in each one of those categories. So, and, as well as what's being targeted, the type of information or technology that's being targeted. So you can really draw some interesting conclusions when you start building up this much data on exactly what China's after and how it is getting it.
Do you think that these issues came to a head during the pandemic? When I was doing research, I started to see story after story after story that seemed like it emerged out of that period of what they were calling wolf warrior diplomacy,
Right.
where basically Chinese diplomacy alienated much of the world. And it seemed like that also hastened the decoupling from China. And it also seemed to lead to some of the current struggles with Belt and Road. Did this kind of come to a head during that pandemic period, do you think?
Well, that's an interesting premise. What the if you go back to the Warring States period, and the reason it 400 to about 200 BC, 470 something, to the reason that's important is because China goes back to the Belt and Road Initiative, rather to the Warring States period. The CCP and senior military ranks have Warring States study groups, right? Working groups where they review the tactics and policies and how things are done. And that actually is quite reflected now. And what comes out of this is this extraordinary understanding of the fall of a hegemon. And they say, what keeps you up at night? Wang Yi, the foreign minister, said the decline of the United States, because at some point they strike back, realizing that they're declining and falling, and that's a dangerous time for all of us. This is China's position on it. And China's position has started as they've risen here through the Deng Xiaoping era, when Deng Xiaoping said, bide your time, hide your strengths. Right. This was Deng Xiaoping's a motto in running the country relative to foreign affairs. Xi Jinping has broken from that. They said, okay, we've been there enough. They're on their knees. Now we can start to crush them. And that's literally, China's way forward. Now, the question is, at this point, was he too early? And they all write, the Chinese historic writings and current writings talk about, when the hegemon realizes that they've lost power, you can expect them to react. But the question is, did they spring this trap too early? Or were they a decade too early? And I think a culmination of factors, the wolf warrior diplomacy, which was Xi Jinping's fault. He was the one pushing that. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs did not want it. Combined with the effects of COVID and China's natural, very paranoid defensive reaction, and CCP not being able to accept any blame for what they had caused. Those culmination of factors have really changed the dynamic. And you take a look at Pew Research polls over the past, opinion polls over the past 5 years, and the positive opinion of China has gone from something like 60% down to 30%, and the negative opinions are over 70% in every place but Africa, basically. So they missed the point of the trap. So now everyone's aware. Now everyone's awake. And now it becomes a battle to put in place the type of actions to thwart China from its plan for dominance, in 2049. And it's openly stated that.
Well, this kind of goes off my questions list, but I was almost wondering if this might lead to reforms within China, because I've started to see popularity polls really going down against Xi Jinping, right? And so I've wondered if maybe that could mean that he will just exit power and retire at some point, and if they may try and re-embrace the rest of the world, I guess.
So, I would love to think that, when I hear Americans, lots of people say, well, their economy is faltering, this and that. He's only, and he's not really losing popularity. He's pretty darn popular amongst the people. I always tell them, you need to include an amen after that sentence, because that's what we're doing. We're praying. He has extraordinary control in society. I have watched video of kids in school, like school-age kids. And, why do you hate the Americans? I hate them because they hate China, and they threaten China and the Japanese, and the same thing. And it happens by the millions and millions. So they are building a very, very strong ethno-nationalist belief system in China. And it's not just nationalism and being China. It's being Han Chinese is superior, right? Okay. It is a racially based, concept that they bring into schooling. And 5-year-olds practicing diving on grenades. That's what's taught in China in a lot of their military training camps. And guess what? If you send your kids to one of these camps, you're higher up on the social credit system, those types of things. So it's there's a lot going against that as well. And nobody knows how. China doesn't know how it's going to shape out. We don't know. Much of the information coming out of China is false, the economic data, simply because no one reports the truth. It's all a loss of face, So the numbers for everyone are pretty flimsy, and our understanding is therefore weak. And understanding the strength of China's economic base, and that of course impacts how it's going to move forward.
A lot of uncertainties. Well,
Yeah.
Nick, let me put a plug in for what you're doing at Shinobi Enterprises. Again, you wrote the book on Chinese espionage for the intelligence community, and after retiring from government service, you're putting up online training resources for professionals, such as your well-known Chinese Intelligence Operations and Tactics course and a brand new China travel security briefing for professionals. I just found that on your website, so I thought I would put a plug in for both of those, and I will put links into the YouTube show notes. So can you tell me a little bit about those, especially about the new one, the travel security briefing?
Yeah. So I actually have another one coming out this week on that topic as well. One designed for executives traveling to China, and one designed for security officers and counterintelligence officers, working with their companies and their executives traveling to China. And what you find is that China makes very, very aggressive use of the environment for collecting against foreign nationals of interest, right? Businessmen, religious figures routinely are targeted. Ethnic minorities coming to China are targeted. Academics, professors are targeted because they're perceived to have influence in their relative societies. State, local, and federal officials are targeted by China. And there are a number of ways this is done. I mean, I cite case after case of how people's laptops were penetrated in hotels, and the use of honey traps, those types of things. The surveillance on the street, how your phones are actually tracked. China tracks actively over 1 billion phones every day. It's extraordinary, but they do. How this is all measured up with systems that measure your gait and your voice print. And again, this is why it becomes important when you think about companies providing information to the Chinese government, because your communications is traveling over most likely China Mobile, right? China, and that is providing a state-owned enterprise providing information, your voice print, and you're, providing that. So there's a lot that comes together to monitor individuals and to seek out their secrets, whether they be personal or corporate or government. So I do that in a 30-minute segment for executives, and in a 2-hour, I think over an hour and a half, close to 2-hour segment for people who really need to know and do debriefings afterwards and things like that. Those are the two latest. I have a number planned for the next few weeks coming out as well.
Okay. Well, and again, I'm going to put links up to the Shinobi Enterprises website, and I put links up to both of those courses. You did not ask me to put plugs in for those. I just volunteered it because I think it's valuable and it helps people understand better what's going on. So
yeah, I think actually I did those courses because just a simple, online courses, just because I do at least a lecture every week. And
yeah.
I mean, at least one lecture every week to a different organization, company or government agency, or, foreign government or something. And there's not enough. I've been working this for 30 something years, right? So, but there's just not enough time to reach out to enough people when you consider the industries that need to know, the academic, the research labs, and blah, 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 So I'm hoping to just push this info out in the most efficient means possible.
Nick, thank you so much for your time today. And thank you again for your remarkable career contributions to the United States over the last 3-4 decades, right? So
Yeah.
I want to
Thanks
close
very
by
much, Eric.
well, let me close by asking what you'll be up to in the next few months, because I know there's a lot of change here and you have been incredibly busy. Thank you so much for being able to give me the time that you have so far, because your schedule is just insane. And I'm wondering, do you anticipate seeing any changes in the U.S.-China international tensions that we've been talking about today as well?
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't think things are going to get better. I don't think the administration has a handle on what it's doing. As we approach a presidential election, every candidate we have is competing against each other to how to be tough on China. And that's all because they know where public opinion is. They know where the Congress is, right? So no one wants to turn around and say, "Oh, let's be, let's shake hands and be friends and bygones be bygones." Not going to happen at this point. So we could see more of a down spiral. I sort of suspect that, particularly through the election year. But we'll see where it goes. It really depends what the next administration, the China experts that they have on staff that they get in. The ones currently were in Obama and have been traditionally very, very friendly to China, but they're getting clobbered, and they absolutely know that. So it'll be really interesting to see how the position is changing.
Wonderful. Nick, thank you again so much for your time today, sir.
Oh, Tim, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I appreciate your time and what you do in getting message out in a variety of different venues. It's really important.